Sarah Martinez stood at her kitchen window, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across her small garden. At 50, she had grown comfortable with the silence that filled her house, though it hadn't always been this way. The ceramic mug in her hands still steamed with fresh coffee, a daily ritual that marked the beginning of another day in her predictable routine. The neighbors had stopped asking about her love life years ago. Mrs. Chun from next door used to slip casual comments about eligible widowers at the grocery store, but even she had given up after Sarah's polite but firm responses. The truth was, Sarah had made peace with being alone. After her divorce 15 years ago, she had focused on rebuilding her life, advancing in her career as a high school guidance counselor, and finding joy in small pleasures. Her phone buzzed on the counter, displaying a text from her younger sister Maria. "Coffee this afternoon? I have news." Sarah smiled, knowing that Maria's news usually involved updates about her 3 teenage children or her husband's latest home improvement project gone wrong. At 38, Maria lived the life everyone expected Sarah should have had by now, complete with soccer practices, parent-teacher conferences, and anniversary celebrations. Sarah had stopped attending family gatherings where relatives asked pointed questions about her dating life. The last time was her cousin's wedding 2 years ago, where Aunt Carmen had cornered her by the dessert table, listing every single man over 40 in their extended social circle. "Mija," she had said, her voice heavy with concern, "you're still beautiful, but time is not on your side. Men want younger women, especially at your age." Those words had stung more than Sarah cared to admit. She had driven home that night, wondering if everyone saw her as a woman whose time had passed, whose chances for love had expired with her youth. The mirror in her bedroom reflected laugh lines around her eyes and silver threads in her dark hair, markers of a life lived but also reminders of years accumulating. Work provided a welcome distraction from such thoughts. Roosevelt High School buzzed with teenage energy that kept Sarah on her toes. Students wandered into her office with problems that seemed monumental to them, but often had simple solutions. She had developed a reputation for being the counselor who actually listened, who didn't dismiss teenage heartbreak as trivial or lecture about grades without understanding the underlying issues. That Tuesday morning, Sarah arrived at school to find her schedule packed with appointments. The first student, Jessica Rodriguez, slumped into the chair across from her desk with the dramatic flair only a 17-year-old could muster. "Mrs. Martinez, my life is basically over," Jessica announced, her voice thick with despair. "Tyler broke up with me because his friend said I was too clingy. But I wasn't being clingy. I just wanted to spend time with him." Sarah leaned forward, recognizing the genuine pain behind the teenage dramatics. "Tell me what happened, Jessica. Start from the beginning." As Jessica poured out her story, Sarah found herself thinking about the parallels between teenage heartbreak and adult loneliness. The fear of being too much, too little, too late. These anxieties didn't disappear with age. They just became more sophisticated in their cruelty. After Jessica left, promising to focus on her college applications instead of texting Tyler, Sarah checked her schedule for the rest of the day. Her afternoon was lighter, which meant she could actually grab lunch in the teacher's lounge instead of eating a granola bar at her desk. The lounge hummed with conversation when she entered. A group of younger teachers clustered around a table, their voices animated as they discussed weekend plans. Sarah had friendly relationships with most of her colleagues, but the age gap often felt pronounced during casual conversations about dating apps, nightclub adventures, and the search for the one. "Sarah," called out Jennifer Walsh, a 28-year-old math teacher with boundless enthusiasm, "come settle an argument for us. Tina says you should never date someone more than 5 years older or younger than you. But I think age is just a number. What do you think?" Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee, considering her response carefully. "I think compatibility matters more than age, but life experience plays a role too. Someone in their 20s might want different things than someone in their 40s. But what if there's real connection?" asked Tina Morrison, the PE teacher. "Like, what if you meet someone who just gets you, regardless of age?" "Then I suppose you'd have to decide what matters most to you," Sarah replied diplomatically, though privately she wondered if anyone would ever get her at this stage of her life. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Sarah found herself distracted. She had been so focused on building a stable, independent life that she had stopped believing in the possibility of unexpected love. The idea seemed almost naive, like believing in fairy tales. That afternoon, she met Maria at their usual coffee shop downtown. Her sister arrived in a whirlwind of energy, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," Maria said, sliding into the booth across from Sarah. "Do you remember David's friend Miguel? The one who was in the army?" Sarah vaguely recalled meeting Miguel at a backyard barbecue years ago. He had been quiet but polite and significantly younger than her. "What about him?" "He's back in town for good. Got out of the service and is looking for a fresh start. David thinks you two should meet." Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. "Maria, no, absolutely not." "Why not?" "He's sweet, he's got his life together, and he's looking for something serious. David says he's tired of dating girls who only care about partying. He's probably 30 at most. I'm 50 years old, Maria. What could we possibly have in common?" Maria leaned forward, her expression serious. "Sarah, you deserve to be happy. You deserve to be loved. Age is just a number, and maybe it's time you stopped letting other people's opinions dictate your choices." Sarah stared into her coffee cup, swirling the cream until it formed pale brown spirals. She had heard variations of this conversation before, usually followed by awkward dinner parties where she was seated next to some divorced man who spent the evening talking about his ex-wife or his golf handicap. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine as I am," Sarah said finally. "I have my work, my house, my garden. I don't need someone else to feel complete." "That's not what this is about," Maria insisted. "This is about not closing yourself off from possibilities just because you're afraid of what people might think." The conversation continued for another hour, with Maria gently pushing and Sarah firmly resisting. By the time they parted ways, Sarah felt emotionally drained. She drove home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, past houses filled with families preparing dinner and children playing in front yards. Her own house stood quiet and welcoming, exactly as she had left it that morning. The garden she had mentioned to Maria was indeed beautiful. Neat rows of vegetables and colorful flower beds that she had cultivated over the years. It represented stability, self-sufficiency, and the life she had built for herself. That evening, Sarah graded papers at her kitchen table while a cooking show played quietly on the small television. The routine felt comfortable, predictable, safe. But as she watched the cheerful host prepare a romantic dinner for two, she found herself wondering what it would be like to cook for someone else again, to have conversation during meals instead of the gentle murmur of background television. She shook her head, dismissing such thoughts as momentary weakness. At 50, she had learned that independence was more reliable than romance, that self-love was more sustainable than seeking validation from others. The women's magazines at the grocery store checkout might promise that love could happen at any age, but real life was more pragmatic. Her phone rang as she was washing dishes. The caller ID showed her mother's number. "Hola, Mommy," Sarah answered, switching to Spanish as she always did with her mother. "Sarah, Mija, how are you feeling? You sounded tired when we talked yesterday." Her mother, Elena, had been widowed for 8 years and had thrown herself into her children's lives with renewed intensity. She worried constantly about Sarah's solitary lifestyle, often comparing it unfavorably to Maria's busy household. "I'm fine, Mama, just busy with work. Maria tells me there's a nice young man who wants to meet you." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied these conversations. "Mama, please don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm just saying that maybe it's time to open your heart again. Your father, God rest his soul, always said that love doesn't follow schedules. I love Papa very much, but he also married you when you were 22. It's different for women my age." "Different how? Because society says so? Because people whisper?" "Sarah, you are my daughter, and I raised you to be strong enough to make your own choices." The conversation ended with promises to talk soon and Elena's gentle reminder that she wanted to see Sarah happy before she was too old to enjoy grandchildren. Sarah hung up feeling the weight of expectations she had been carrying for years. The expectation to find love, to settle down, to follow a path that seemed increasingly unrealistic as time passed. She prepared for bed mechanically, going through the motions of her nighttime routine. As she brushed her teeth, she studied her reflection in the bathroom mirror. 50 wasn't old by modern standards, but in the world of dating and romance, it sometimes felt ancient. The culture celebrated youth, passion, new love, not the quieter, more complex emotions of middle age. In bed, Sarah lay awake longer than usual, thinking about Maria's words and her mother's concerns. She had built a good life for herself, one filled with meaningful work, close friendships, and personal accomplishments. But in the darkness of her bedroom, she could admit to herself what she rarely acknowledged during busy days. She was lonely. Not the desperate, aching loneliness of her early 30s when the divorce had left her feeling broken and rejected. This was different, a quiet awareness of absence, the knowledge that her life, while full, might be fuller with someone to share it with. She thought about Miguel, the young veteran Maria had mentioned. He was probably handsome, probably kind, probably everything her sister claimed. But he was also probably looking for a woman his own age, someone who could give him the traditional future most men wanted: marriage, children, a lifetime of shared dreams that began with decades ahead of them. Sarah turned on her side, pulling the covers up to her chin. Tomorrow would bring another day of predictable routines, student meetings, and the comfortable rhythms of her established life. She would not think about blind dates or younger men or the possibility that love might still find her at 50. But as sleep finally claimed her, a small part of her mind whispered what she wouldn't admit in daylight. What if Maria was right? What if age really was just a number, and she was letting fear disguise itself as wisdom? What if the person meant to love her was still out there, waiting for the courage that she had convinced herself she no longer needed? The questions followed her into sleep, where dreams of possibility mixed with the practical certainties that had shaped her waking hours. In the morning, she would push such thoughts aside and return to the safety of her solitary life. But the seeds of curiosity had been planted, and, like everything else in her carefully tended garden, they would grow when the conditions were right. 3 weeks passed before Sarah heard Miguel's name again. She had almost managed to forget about Maria's matchmaking attempts when her sister called on a Friday afternoon, her voice bubbling with barely contained excitement. "Sarah, you have to come to David's birthday party tomorrow night. I know you usually skip our parties, but this one is special." Sarah balanced the phone between her ear and shoulder while she watered her tomato plants. The late afternoon sun felt warm on her face, and she had been looking forward to a quiet weekend of gardening and reading. "Maria, you know I'm not really a party person anymore. Besides, David's friends are all your age. I'd feel out of place. That's exactly why you need to come. You spend too much time hiding in that house. And before you ask, yes, Miguel will be there, but I'm not trying to set you up. I just think you should get out and socialize." Despite her protests, Sarah found herself agreeing to attend. Perhaps Maria was right about getting out more. She had declined so many invitations over the years that people had stopped extending them. The thought of becoming the hermit aunt who only appeared at Christmas and funerals motivated her more than any matchmaking scheme. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. Sarah stood in front of her closet, feeling foolish about how much thought she was putting into her outfit. She had spent the afternoon at the salon, getting her hair trimmed and highlighted. Not for any man, she told herself, but because she had been neglecting her appearance lately. She settled on a navy blue dress that was elegant but not trying too hard, paired with low heels that would let her stand comfortably for hours. The mirror reflected a woman who looked younger than her 50 years, though Sarah couldn't decide if that was the lighting or wishful thinking. The party was being held at David and Maria's house, a sprawling ranch-style home in the suburbs that always seemed to be filled with laughter and chaos. When Sarah arrived, the driveway was already packed with cars, and she could hear music and conversation spilling out into the evening air. Maria opened the door before Sarah could knock, pulling her into a warm hug that smelled of perfume and wine. "You look beautiful. I'm so glad you decided to come. David's going to be thrilled." The living room buzzed with conversation as Maria led her through clusters of guests. Sarah recognized some faces from previous gatherings: teachers from David's school, neighbors, family friends. Everyone seemed younger, more energetic, more connected than she felt. "Sarah," David appeared at her elbow, grinning broadly. "I can't believe Maria actually got you here. This calls for celebration. What can I get you to drink?" She accepted a glass of wine and let herself be drawn into conversations about work, local politics, and weekend plans. It felt good to be social again, to remember that she could be charming and engaging when she made the effort. Several people commented that they hadn't seen her in ages and insisted she needed to join them for various upcoming events. She was laughing at a story about David's disastrous attempt to install a ceiling fan when Maria appeared at her side, practically vibrating with excitement. "Sarah, there's someone I want you to meet." Before Sarah could object, Maria was guiding her across the room toward a group of men clustered around the television, watching a football game. One of them turned as they approached, and Sarah felt her breath catch slightly. Miguel Torres was not what she had expected. Her memory of him from years ago had been vague, a quiet young man in military uniform who had seemed polite but unremarkable. The man who stood before her now commanded attention without trying. He was tall and lean, with the kind of easy confidence that came from facing real challenges and surviving them. His dark hair showed touches of early gray at the temples, and his brown eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences most people his age hadn't encountered. "Miguel, I'd like you to meet my sister Sarah," Maria said with studied casualness. "Sarah, this is Miguel Torres. He and David served together overseas." Miguel extended his hand with a warm smile. "It's good to see you again, Sarah. Maria tells me you work at the high school as a counselor." His handshake was firm but not aggressive, and his voice carried a slight accent that suggested Spanish had been his first language. Up close, Sarah guessed he was probably in his early 30s, which made the age difference even more apparent than she had feared. "Yes, I've been there about 12 years now. Maria mentioned you recently left the military?" 8 years in the Army. Decided it was time for something different. His smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that made Sarah feel like she was the only person in the room. "I'm actually starting graduate school in January. Psychology program at the State University." Sarah felt a flutter of surprise. She had expected him to mention plans for travel or starting a business, the kinds of adventures that appealed to young men beginning their civilian lives. Psychology suggested depth, a desire to understand and help others. "That's wonderful. What area of psychology interests you most?" "Trauma counseling, specifically for veterans. I saw too many good people struggle with the transition back to civilian life. Figured I could do more good with a degree than just sharing war stories." The conversation flowed easily from there. Miguel asked thoughtful questions about her work with teenagers, sharing insights about young people he had mentored in the military. He spoke with passion about his plans to work with veterans dealing with PTSD, and Sarah found herself impressed by his maturity and sense of purpose. "I should probably let you get back to the game," Sarah said, after they had been talking for nearly an hour. She had become aware that his friends were occasionally glancing their way, and she didn't want to monopolize his time. "Actually, I was thinking of getting some air. The game's pretty boring anyway. Would you like to see Maria's garden? I helped David put in the new irrigation system last month." They walked through the sliding glass doors onto the deck, where the sounds of the party faded to a pleasant background murmur. The garden was indeed impressive, with neat rows of vegetables and a small orchard that David had been tending for years. "This is beautiful," Sarah said, running her fingers along the tomato vines. "I have a much smaller garden at home, but there's something peaceful about growing your own food. David tells me you've got quite the green thumb. Said your yard looks like something out of a magazine." Sarah laughed. "David exaggerates. It's just a hobby that got out of hand. I started with a few herbs and somehow ended up with raised beds taking over half my backyard." They found themselves sitting on the deck swing that David had installed the previous summer. The evening air was cool, but comfortable, and the party sounds from inside created a pleasant backdrop to their conversation. "Can I ask you something?" Miguel said, after a few minutes of comfortable silence. Sarah tensed slightly. "Of course. When Maria mentioned you earlier, she seemed to think you don't get out much. Is that true, or is she just being an overprotective sister?" The question was direct, but asked with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Sarah considered how to answer honestly without sounding pathetic. "A little of both, I suppose. I went through a period after my divorce where I was very social, very focused on building a new life. But somewhere along the way, I got comfortable with quiet evenings and predictable routines. Maria worries that I'm turning into a hermit." "Are you?" "Turning into a hermit, I mean." Sarah looked at him, noting the way he asked difficult questions without making them feel invasive. "Maybe. It's easier sometimes being alone. Less complicated. I understand that. After I got back from my last deployment, I spent about 6 months barely leaving my apartment. Told myself I was decompressing, but really I was just afraid of having to explain myself to people who couldn't understand what I'd been through." "What changed?" "David, actually. He showed up one day with a six-pack and refused to leave until I agreed to have dinner with him, and Maria said I could either start living again or admit that the military had broken me. I was too stubborn to admit being broken. They talked until the party began winding down, sharing stories about their work, their families, their plans for the future. Sarah found herself surprised by how easy it was to talk to him, how he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and experiences rather than just being polite. When the time came to leave, Miguel walked her to her car. "I enjoyed talking with you tonight," he said as she fumbled with her keys. "Would you maybe like to get coffee sometime? I promise I won't interrogate you about your social life." Sarah felt her heart speed up. The invitation was simple, friendly, but she could see something deeper in his eyes, genuine interest that went beyond casual conversation. "Miguel, I appreciate the invitation, but—" she started then stopped. What was her objection exactly? That he was younger? That people might talk? That she was scared? "Just coffee," he said gently. Two adults having a conversation over caffeine. No pressure, no expectations. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Coffee sound nice." They exchanged phone numbers, and Sarah drove home feeling lightheaded and slightly terrified. She had just agreed to a coffee date with a man 12 years younger than her. The rational part of her mind cataloged all the reasons this was a mistake, while another part whispered that she had enjoyed his company more than she had enjoyed anyone's in years. At home, she kicked off her heels and replayed the evening in her mind. Miguel had been easy to talk to, interesting, and surprisingly mature for his age. But he was still in his early 30s, still building his life, still young enough to want things she couldn't give him. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "So, how was the party? Did you meet anyone interesting?" Sarah stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "Yes, actually. Thank you for making me come." Maria's response came immediately. "I knew it. Tell me everything." "Tomorrow," Sarah typed back. It's been a long day. She prepared for bed with the same routine she had followed for years, but everything felt slightly different. The face in the bathroom mirror looked flushed, animated in a way she hadn't seen in a long time. The woman looking back at her didn't look 50. She looked alive. In bed, Sarah tried to read her usual mystery novel, but her mind kept wandering back to the evening's conversation. Miguel had asked about her dreams for the future, a question that had caught her off guard. She had grown so accustomed to thinking in terms of maintaining her current life that she had stopped imagining it could be different or better. When he had asked what she wanted to be doing in 5 years, she had given the standard answer about maybe retiring from the school district and doing private counseling. But the question lingered. What did she want? When had she stopped believing she deserved to want more than stability and solitude? Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. Looking forward to that coffee." "Miguel," Sarah stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Thank you too. Have a good weekend." She set the phone on her nightstand and turned off the light, but sleep was elusive. Her mind raced with possibilities and concerns in equal measure. Coffee was just coffee, she told herself. A friendly conversation between two adults who had discovered they enjoyed each other's company. But even as she tried to minimize the significance of the evening, Sarah knew something had shifted. For the first time in years, she was looking forward to something that involved taking a risk, opening herself up to the possibility of connection with another person. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. At 50, she had convinced herself that the time for romantic adventures was behind her, that she was too old for the uncertainty and vulnerability that came with new relationships. But Miguel had looked at her like she was worth knowing, worth spending time with, worth taking seriously. Maybe Maria was right. Maybe age was just a number, and she had been letting fear disguise itself as wisdom. Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind the safety of routine and predictability. As Sarah finally drifted toward sleep, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to have coffee with Miguel, to continue the conversation they had started on the deck. For the first time in years, the future felt uncertain, but full of potential rather than simply more of the same. In the morning, she would probably panic about what she had agreed to. She would list all the rational reasons why a relationship between them was impossible. But tonight, in the darkness of her bedroom, she let herself feel the flutter of anticipation that came with new possibilities. The seeds of change that had been planted weeks ago were finally beginning to sprout, and Sarah was discovering that she was curious to see what might grow. The coffee shop Miguel had suggested was a small, independently owned place downtown that Sarah had never visited despite working only a few blocks away. As she pushed through the heavy wooden door on Tuesday afternoon, the rich aroma of freshly ground beans and the soft murmur of conversation enveloped her like a warm embrace. She had changed clothes 3 times before leaving home, finally settling on dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that Maria had bought her for Christmas. The outfit felt casual, but put together, appropriate for a coffee meeting that she was still telling herself was just friendly conversation. Miguel was already there, seated at a small table by the window, with 2 cups in front of him. He stood when he saw her, and Sarah noticed again how his presence seemed to command attention without effort. Other patrons glanced their way as she approached, and she wondered if they were thinking what she had been thinking all week, that they made an unlikely pair. "I hope you don't mind that I ordered for you," he said, pulling out her chair. "Maria mentioned you like lattes, so I got you a vanilla latte. If that's wrong, I can get you something else." The gesture was thoughtful rather than presumptuous, and Sarah felt some of her nervousness ease. "That sounds perfect. Thank you." They settled into conversation easily, picking up where they had left off at the party. Miguel asked about her week at school, and Sarah found herself telling him about Jessica, the 17-year-old whose boyfriend had broken up with her for being too clingy. "She came to see me again today," Sarah said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Apparently, she's been analyzing every interaction she had with this boy, trying to figure out exactly what she did wrong. It breaks my heart to see her questioning herself like that. Miguel nadit sotfeli. I see that a lot with the younger guys in my unit. This need to dissect every relationship failure until they've convinced themselves they're fundamentally flawed. Like there's some perfect way to be in a relationship, and if they could just figure out the code, everything would work out." "Exactly. I keep trying to tell Jessica that sometimes people just aren't compatible, and that's nobody's fault. But at 17, everything feels like evidence of personal failure." "What do you tell her?" Sarah considered the question. "That relationships require 2 people who are ready for the same thing at the same time. That timing matters as much as compatibility. That sometimes the right person comes along when you're not looking for them." The last words hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt her cheeks warm as she realized how they might sound. Miguel's eyes met hers, and she saw a flicker of something deeper than casual conversation. "That's good advice," he said quietly. "Do you follow it yourself?" The question was gentle, but pointed, and Sarah felt the familiar urge to deflect with humor or change the subject. Instead, she found herself being honest. "Not particularly. I think I convinced myself that the timing was never going to be right again, so I stopped looking altogether." "What changed?" "I'm not sure anything has changed. I'm just here." Miguel smiled, and the warmth in his expression made Sarah's heart flutter in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. They talked for 2 hours, their conversation ranging from serious topics like his plans for graduate school to lighter subjects like their shared love of mystery novels and cooking shows. Sarah discovered that Miguel was working part-time at a local nonprofit that helped veterans transition to civilian life while he waited to start classes in January. He asked thoughtful questions about her work and seemed genuinely interested in her perspectives on education and adolescent development. "I have a confession," Miguel said as they prepared to leave. "This wasn't supposed to be just coffee." Sarah's stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Maria may have mentioned that you were unlikely to accept a dinner invitation from someone you barely knew, so I should start with something casual. But I'd really like to take you to dinner, Sarah. A real date, not just coffee between friends." Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. The past 2 hours had been wonderful, easy, engaging, comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. But dinner implied something more serious, a step toward whatever this was becoming between them. "Miguel, I need to be honest with you about something." "Okay, I'm 50 years old. I know I might not look it, but that's the reality." "You're what, 31? 32, 33, 33. Do you understand what that means? I'm not looking for someone to have children with, or to build a traditional future with. I'm not even sure I remember how to be in a relationship." Miguel leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah nodded. "When you were talking to me tonight, did my age matter? When we were discussing your student, or my work with veterans, or that terrible movie you saw last weekend, were you thinking about how old I am?" Sarah considered the question honestly. "No, I wasn't thinking about it at all. Neither was I. I was thinking about how smart you are, how kind, how easy you're to talk to. I was thinking that I haven't enjoyed spending time with someone this much in longer than I can remember. But, Miguel, I know you think the age difference matters, and maybe it will. Maybe we'll discover we want different things, or we're at different stages of our lives. But shouldn't we find out? Shouldn't we give this a chance before we decide it won't work?" Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. When was the last time someone had fought for the opportunity to spend time with her? When was the last time someone had seen her as worth the effort? I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Of what? Of everything. Of what people will think. Of getting hurt. Of hurting you when you realize this was a mistake. Miguel reached across the table and covered her hand with his. What if it's not a mistake? What if those people who think they know what's best for you are wrong? What if the only opinions that matter are yours and mine? Sarah looked down at their joined hands. His was slightly calloused from manual work, warm and strong. She couldn't remember the last time someone had held her hand, the simple intimacy of palm against palm. Dinner, she said finally. One dinner. But I choose the restaurant, and if this goes badly, you have to promise not to make it weird with David and Maria. Miguel's smile was radiant. Deal. When? Friday. I'll pick you up at 7. Sarah gave him her address, and they walked together to their cars. The evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the promise of winter. At her car, Miguel paused. Thank you for saying yes. And thank you for being honest about your concerns. I know this isn't easy for you. How can you be so confident about this? Aren't you worried that people will think you're having some kind of midlife crisis by dating an older woman? Miguel laughed, but not unkindly. Sarah, I spent 3 tours in Afghanistan. I've been shot at, bombed, and asked to make decisions that affected people's lives. After that, worrying about what people think of my dating choices seems pretty trivial. He kissed her cheek gently before getting into his truck, leaving Sarah standing beside her car with her fingers pressed to the spot where his lips had touched her skin. The drive home gave her time to process what had just happened. She had agreed to a date with Miguel Torres, a man 17 years younger than her, despite every rational voice in her head screaming that it was a mistake. But beneath the fear and uncertainty, she felt something she had almost forgotten: excitement. At home, she called Maria immediately. Well, her sister answered before Sarah could even say hello. We had coffee. It was nice. Nice. That's it. Come on, Sarah, give me something to work with here. We're having dinner Friday night. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Maria, are you there? I'm here. I'm just wow. I can't believe you said yes to dinner. Neither can I. Maria, what am I doing? This is crazy, right? Maybe, but sometimes crazy is exactly what we need. Sarah, I saw the way he looked at you at the party. That man is genuinely interested in you. Not because he has some fetish for older women or because he's going through a phase. He likes you. But what if what? What if you have a wonderful time? What if you discover that age really doesn't matter as much as you think it does? What if you remember what it feels like to be appreciated by someone who doesn't take you for granted? Sarah sank onto her couch, suddenly, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. I don't know how to do this anymore, Maria. Dating was hard enough when I was 35. How am I supposed to navigate this at 50? The same way you navigate everything else in your life, with intelligence, grace, and the understanding that you deserve to be happy. And Sarah, stop thinking of 50 as some kind of expiration date. You're vibrant, successful, beautiful. Any man would be lucky to be with you. After they hung up, Sarah sat in her living room, staring at the framed photos on her mantelpiece. Pictures of family gatherings, graduations, vacations with friends. A life well lived, but a life lived largely alone. She thought about Miguel's question. When was the last time she had considered what she wanted rather than what was appropriate or expected? That night, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror for a long time, really looking at herself. The woman reflected back wasn't the young teacher who had started at Roosevelt High 12 years ago, but she wasn't elderly either. Her body was softer than it had been in her 30s, marked by the changes that time brought to everyone, but she was healthy, energetic, alive. Maybe the voice in her head that whispered about being too old wasn't wisdom. Maybe it was fear wearing a disguise. Maybe the people who suggested her time had passed were speaking from their own limitations rather than universal truths. The thought terrified and liberated her in equal measure. Friday approached with the speed of a runaway train. Sarah found herself distracted at work, snapping at a student who came to complain about a grade, and having to apologize immediately afterward. She rescheduled her usual Friday afternoon planning session, claiming she had a dentist appointment, then spent an hour at the mall looking for something appropriate to wear. The restaurant Miguel had agreed to let her choose was Bella Vista, an upscale Italian place where she had celebrated her birthday the previous year with Maria and David. The food was excellent, The atmosphere was sophisticated but not stuffy, and she felt comfortable there. If the evening was a disaster, at least it would happen somewhere she could retreat gracefully. At 6:30, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror wearing a black dress that was elegant without being too formal, her hair styled in loose waves that she hoped looked effortless but had taken 45 minutes to achieve. Her reflection showed a woman who was nervous but determined, scared but hopeful. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Miguel stood on her front porch wearing a navy suit that emphasized his tall frame and broad shoulders. He held a small bouquet of sunflowers, not roses, which might have seemed too romantic, but not something casual like daisies either. The choice felt perfect. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice warm with genuine appreciation. "Thank you. These are lovely." She accepted the flowers, inhaling their sunny scent. "Come in while I put them in water." Miguel followed her into the kitchen, and Sarah was suddenly aware of how domestic the moment felt. A man in her space, watching her arrange flowers in a vase. The intimacy of it made her hands shake slightly as she filled the vase with water. "Your house is beautiful," Miguel said, looking around the kitchen with its warm colors and well-used cooking implements. "Very welcoming. Thank you. I've been here about 8 years. It's the first place that ever really felt like home." "I can see why. It suits you." The drive to the restaurant was comfortable, their conversation flowing easily despite Sarah's nerves. Miguel asked about her neighborhood, and she found herself telling him about the community garden project she had helped organize, the book club that met monthly at her house, the small ways she had built a life in her corner of the world. At the restaurant, the hostess led them to a table by the window overlooking the city lights. The ambience was perfect, intimate without being too romantic, elegant without being intimidating. Sarah began to relax as they studied their menus and ordered wine. "So," Miguel said after the waiter had taken their order, "tell me something I don't know about Sarah Martinez." "Like what?" "Anything. A dream you've never shared, a fear you've never admitted, a secret talent." Sarah considered the question, twirling her wine glass between her fingers. "I've always wanted to travel to Ireland. I have this fantasy of renting a cottage in the countryside for a month, just reading and writing and walking through those impossibly green fields you see in photographs." "What's stopping you?" "Practical things. Work commitments, financial planning, the feeling that solo travel at my age would be somehow sad." "Why sad?" "Because it's the kind of trip people take with someone they love. Romantic and adventurous and all those things that are supposed to be for couples." Miguel leaned forward slightly. "What if those are just stories we tell ourselves? What if romantic and adventurous are available to anyone brave enough to claim them?" The question hung between them as their appetizers arrived, and Sarah found herself wondering when she had started limiting her dreams to what seemed age-appropriate and socially acceptable. When had she decided that certain experiences were only for people in different circumstances than her own? "Your turn," she said. "Tell me something I don't know about Miguel Torres." "I write poetry," he said without hesitation. "Bad poetry, but poetry nonetheless. Started in Afghanistan when I needed a way to process everything that was happening. Never showed it to anyone, but I still write when I need to work through complicated feelings." Sarah felt a flutter of surprise and appreciation. The admission was vulnerable in a way that contradicted stereotypes about young men, especially military men. "What kind of poetry?" "The kind that would embarrass me if anyone ever read it. Lots of metaphors about storms and journeys and finding light in darkness. Very dramatic, very earnest. It sounds beautiful. It sounds like therapy that rhymes." They laughed together, and Sarah felt another layer of her defenses slip away. Miguel was not the young soldier she had expected, focused on adventure and conquest. He was thoughtful, self-aware, willing to be vulnerable. The combination was more attractive than any physical trait. As the evening progressed, their conversation deepened. Miguel talked about his struggles with readjusting to civilian life, the way combat had changed his perspective on what mattered. Sarah found herself sharing her own challenges, the loneliness after her divorce, the way she had slowly withdrawn from social situations to avoid questions about her personal life. "I spent years thinking I was protecting myself," she admitted over dessert. "But somewhere along the way, protection became isolation." "What made you realize that?" "Meeting you, actually. Remembering what it felt like to connect with someone new, to feel seen." Miguel reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. I see you, Sarah. Not your age, not what other people think you should be. Just you. The words were simple, but they hit Sarah with the force of revelation. When was the last time someone had seen her as she was rather than as a collection of roles and expectations? The evening ended too soon, though they had been talking for nearly 3 hours. Outside the restaurant, Miguel walked her to his truck, and Sarah felt the familiar flutter of end-of-date nervousness. What happened now? What were the rules for a 50-year-old woman and a 33-year-old man? At her front door, Miguel paused, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. I had a wonderful time tonight, he said softly. So did I. Thank you for dinner, and for pushing me to take the chance. Can I see you again? Sarah looked up into his eyes, seeing warmth and hope, and something deeper that made her heart race. The rational part of her mind whispered warnings about age and appropriateness and the inevitability of heartbreak. But a stronger voice, one she was just beginning to recognize as her own authentic desire, whispered something different. Yes, she said. I like that very much. Miguel smiled and leaned down to kiss her, a gentle press of lips that tasted of wine and possibility. The kiss was brief, respectful, but it left Sarah feeling dizzy with feelings she had almost forgotten were possible. I'll call you tomorrow, he promised. Sarah watched him drive away before letting herself into the house. In the hallway mirror, she caught sight of her reflection, flushed, bright-eyed, looking younger and more alive than she had in years. The woman looking back at her didn't look like someone whose time had passed. She looked like someone whose time was just beginning. The whispers started 3 weeks after Sarah and Miguel began dating openly. She noticed them first at the grocery store when Mrs. Henderson from the church committee suddenly found her cereal selection fascinating enough to avoid eye contact. Then came the pointed looks at the school faculty meeting when Jennifer Walsh mentioned seeing Sarah at the farmer's market with a very handsome young man. Sarah had expected this. She had prepared herself for the gossip, the raised eyebrows, the careful questions disguised as concern. What she hadn't expected was how little it would matter compared to the way Miguel made her feel when they were together. Their relationship had developed with surprising ease over the past month. They had fallen into comfortable routines, coffee on Tuesday afternoons, dinner on Fridays, lazy Saturday mornings when Miguel would appear at her door with fresh pastries, and the newspaper. He had fixed her kitchen faucet without being asked, and had spent an entire weekend helping her prepare her garden for winter. You know, people are talking, Sarah said one evening as they walked through the park near her house. The autumn air was crisp, and their breath created small clouds as they spoke. Are they saying anything interesting? Miguel asked, adjusting his pace to match hers. The usual things. That I'm having a midlife crisis. That you're looking for a mother figure. That it's inappropriate for a woman my age to be dating someone young enough to be her. She paused, unable to finish the sentence. Young enough to be your what? Your younger brother? Because that's about the only relationship that would make mathematical sense. Sarah laughed despite her mood. You know what I mean? I know what they mean, and I know they're wrong. Sarah, look at me. She stopped walking and turned to face him. The evening light caught the silver in his hair, reminding her that at 33, he wasn't exactly a boy. I need you to understand something, Miguel said, taking her hands in his. I have never been more certain about anything in my life. Not when I enlisted, not when I chose my degree program, not when I decided to move back here. You're not a phase or experiment or some misguided attempt to recapture my youth. You are the woman I want to be with. But, Miguel, no, let me finish. I know this is hard for you. I know you're fighting against everything you've been told about what's appropriate or normal. But I need you to trust what you feel when we're together, not what other people think they know about us. Sarah felt tears threatening. The intensity of his conviction both thrilled and terrified her. I'm trying, but it's hard to ignore decades of conditioning about how these things are supposed to work. What if they're not supposed to work any particular way? What if we get to decide how this works? That conversation stayed with Sarah through the following week. She found herself paying closer attention to the reactions of others, noting the subtle disapproval mixed with curiosity. Her colleague Jennifer was the most direct, cornering Sarah in the copy room on Thursday afternoon. So, you're really serious about this guy? Jennifer asked, her tone carefully neutral. We're getting to know each other, Sarah replied diplomatically. It's just, he's pretty young, isn't he? Sarah straightened, feeling a familiar defensive anger rise in her chest. He's 33, Jennifer. That's hardly a child. I just meant, what do you two have in common? You're at such different stages of life. The question was fair, but the underlying assumption annoyed Sarah. We both work in helping professions. We both enjoy reading, cooking, and long conversations about everything from politics to poetry. We both value honesty and kindness. Should I go on? Jennifer held up her hands in surrender. I'm just looking out for you, Sarah. I don't want to see you get hurt when he decides he wants someone his own age to start a family with. After Jennifer left, Sarah stood alone in the copy room, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to collate the worksheets she had been printing. The conversation had touched on her deepest fear, that Miguel would eventually realize he wanted the traditional future most men his age sought. That evening, she broached the subject carefully as they prepared dinner together in her kitchen. Miguel was making pasta sauce from scratch, a skill he had learned from his grandmother, while Sarah assembled a salad. "Can I ask you something?" she said, watching him add herbs to the simmering tomatoes. "Always. Do you want children?" Miguel's hand stilled on the wooden spoon. "Why do you ask?" "Because I need to know what we're doing here. If you want a family, a traditional future, then we're just postponing an inevitable ending." Miguel turned off the burner and turned to face her fully. "Sarah, I'm 33 years old. If I wanted children badly enough to make them a requirement for any relationship, I would have found a way to make that happen by now." "That's not really an answer." "You're right. Here's the honest answer. I thought I wanted children when I was younger. It seemed like the thing you were supposed to want. But the older I get, the more I realize that what I actually want is a partner. Someone to share life with, to come home to build something meaningful with. Children would be nice if they happened naturally with the right person, but they're not the goal." Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "And if they don't happen naturally with me, then we build a different kind of life together. Sarah, you're not a consolation prize or a compromise. You're the person I choose." The conversation shifted something fundamental between them. Sarah realized that she had been waiting for Miguel to recognize the limitations of their relationship, to see her through the lens of societal expectations. But he consistently refused to view her as anything other than the woman he cared about. 2 days later, the test of their relationship came from an unexpected source. Sarah was grading papers in her living room when her doorbell rang. She opened the door to find her mother standing on the porch, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Mama, what are you doing here? You said you were coming next weekend. We need to talk, Mija. May I come in?" Sarah's heart sank as she led her mother into the living room. Elena Martinez was a small woman who had raised 5 children and buried a husband, and her opinions carried the weight of experience and absolute certainty about right and wrong. "Maria told me about your young man," Elena said without preamble, settling into the armchair like a judge taking the bench. "What exactly did Maria tell you?" "That you're dating a soldier boy who's barely out of school. That you're making yourself the talk of the neighborhood. That you're acting like a woman half your age instead of accepting your situation with grace." Sarah felt anger flare in her chest. "My situation? Sarah, you are 50 years old. You have a good job, a nice house, respect in your community. Why would you risk all of that for some temporary excitement with a man who will leave you as soon as he finds a younger woman to give him babies?" "Because I care about him, Mama. Because he makes me happy. Because I deserve to be loved at any age." Elena's expression softened slightly. "Of course you deserve love, Mija. But be realistic. What future can you have with this boy? His name is Miguel, and he's not a boy. He's a man who has served his country, who's working on a graduate degree, who treats me with more respect and affection than I've received in years. And what happens when a novelty wears off? When his friends start asking why he's with an old woman instead of someone who can give him children?" The words hit Sarah like physical blows, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Maybe that will happen. Maybe this won't work out. But maybe it will. Maybe age is less important than compatibility and genuine affection. Sarah, listen to me. I love you. But you're living in a fantasy. Men his age don't stay with women our age. They have their fun, and then they move on to what they really want." Before Sarah could respond, she heard the sound of a truck pulling into her driveway. Through the window, she saw Miguel getting out of his vehicle, carrying a bouquet of flowers, and wearing the smile that never failed to make her heart flutter. "That's him, isn't it?" Elena asked, moving to the window. Sarah watched her mother's face as Miguel approached the house. She saw Elena take in his mature bearing, the confidence in his step, the way he paused to admire the garden she had mentioned in their conversations. The doorbell rang, and Sarah answered it with her mother watching from across the room. "Hi, beautiful," Miguel said, then stopped when he noticed they weren't alone. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you had company." "Miguel, I'd like you to meet my mother, Elena Martinez." "Mama, this is Miguel Torres." Miguel stepped forward with a natural courtesy that had impressed Sarah from their first meeting, extending his hand to Elena with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Martinez, it's a pleasure to meet you. Sarah talks about you often." Elena shook his hand, studying his face with the intensity of a woman evaluating a potential threat to her daughter's well-being. "So you're the young man who's been spending time with my daughter?" "Yes, ma'am. She's wonderful company." "How old are you, Miguel?" 33, ma'am." "And what are your intentions with Sarah?" Sarah felt her face flush with embarrassment. "Mama, this is not an interrogation." But Miguel answered seriously, as if the question deserved respect. "My intentions are to spend as much time with her as she'll allow, to treat her with the care and affection she deserves, and to see where this relationship leads us." "And what about when you decide you want to marry someone younger and start a family?" Miguel was quiet for a moment, and Sarah held her breath, waiting for him to stumble over the difficult question. "Mrs. Martinez, with respect, I think you're operating under some assumptions that don't apply to me. I'm not looking for someone younger. I'm not looking for anyone except Sarah. If marriage is something we both want eventually, then we'll discuss it. If children happen to be part of our future together, that would be wonderful, but they're not a requirement for my happiness." Elena's expression remained skeptical. "And you expect me to believe that a man your age doesn't want children? I expect you to believe that some men are more interested in finding the right partner than in checking boxes on a list of what they're supposed to want." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Sarah's mantel clock. Elena studied Miguel with the intensity of a general evaluating an opponent, while Sarah wondered if this conversation would end her relationship before it had truly begun. Finally, Elena spoke. "You seem like a nice young man, Miguel. But nice young men change their minds. They meet girls their own age and remember what they thought they wanted." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "You're right that people sometimes change their minds about what they want. Sarah could decide tomorrow that she doesn't want the complications of dating someone younger. She could realize that she prefers the independence she's built for herself. But I hope she won't, because being with her has made me happier than I've been in years." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the simple honesty of his words. Miguel continued, addressing Elena directly. "I understand your concern for Sarah. She's your daughter, and you want to protect her from being hurt. But I need you to understand that she's not some desperate woman clinging to youth. She's intelligent, accomplished, beautiful, and any man would be fortunate to be with her. I'm not doing her a favor by dating her. She's doing me one by giving me a chance." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between Miguel and Sarah. Finally, she sighed. "I suppose I should let you two talk. Miguel, it was interesting to meet you." After Elena left, Sarah and Miguel sat together on her couch in the growing darkness. She had turned off most of the lights, and the room was illuminated only by the soft glow of a table lamp. "I'm sorry about that," Sarah said quietly. "My mother means well, but she has very fixed ideas about how relationships should work. She loves you. I respect that, even if I disagree with her conclusions. Miguel, what if she's right? What if I'm being naive about this?" Miguel turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the dim light. "Sarah, do you remember what you told me about your student Jessica? About how sometimes the right person comes along when you're not looking for them?" "Yes. I wasn't looking for you. I came to David's party, expected to eat too much barbecue and catch up with old friends. Instead, I met a woman who challenged everything I thought I knew about what I wanted from life. You didn't fit any pattern I had imagined for myself, but you fit me." He took her hands in his voice growing softer. "I can't promise you that this will work out exactly the way we hope. I can't promise that we won't face challenges or that people won't continue to question our choices. But I can promise you that my feelings for you have nothing to do with experimentation or rebellion or some psychological need for a mother figure. I care about you because you're kind, intelligent, funny, and beautiful. Because you listen when I talk about my dreams and fears. Because you make me want to be a better man." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I care about you too. More than I expected, more than I thought I could at this stage of my life. Then, that's all that matters. Not your mother's concerns, not the gossips at the grocery store, not some imaginary timeline that says you're too old for new love. Miguel kissed her then, soft and tender, and Sarah felt the last of her resistance melt away. She had spent so much energy fighting against this relationship that she had almost forgotten to appreciate what it was giving her: joy, companionship, the giddy excitement of new possibilities. When they broke apart, Sarah rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered, the words surprising her with their certainty. "I love you too," Miguel replied. Age difference and all. They laughed together in the darkened room, and Sarah realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't worried about what came next. She was simply grateful for what was happening now. Love that had found her when she least expected it, with a man who saw her as she truly was rather than as society suggested she should be. The future was uncertain, but it was uncertain for everyone. At 50 and 33, she and Miguel were just choosing to face that uncertainty together, one day at a time. 1 year later, Sarah stood in her kitchen making coffee for two, a routine that had become as natural as breathing. The morning sun streamed through windows that Miguel had cleaned the previous weekend, illuminating the small changes that marked his gradual integration into her life. His coffee mug beside hers, his jacket hanging by the door, a book of contemporary poetry bookmarked and waiting on the counter. The past 12 months had not been without challenges. There had been difficult conversations with family members, awkward encounters with colleagues, and moments when the age difference felt more pronounced than others. But there had also been unexpected joys, deep intimacy, and a love that had grown stronger rather than weaker as they navigated the complexities of their unconventional relationship. Miguel emerged from the bathroom, already dressed for his day, at the Veterans Center where he had started working part-time while completing his graduate program. The sight of him in her hallway, looking comfortable and at home, still made Sarah's heart skip slightly. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and kissing her neck softly. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Always do when I'm here." He had been staying over 3 or 4 nights a week for the past 6 months, and they had been discussing the possibility of him moving in permanently. The conversation was complicated by practical considerations: his lease, her established routines, the symbolic weight of taking such a step. But it felt increasingly inevitable. Sarah handed him his coffee, noting the way his eyes lit up at the first sip. She had learned to make it exactly the way he liked it, just as he had learned that she preferred her eggs over easy and her toast barely golden. "I have something to tell you," Miguel said, settling onto one of the kitchen stools. Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. Important announcements still made her nervous, though Miguel had never given her reason to worry about his commitment. "Dr. Harrison wants to offer me a position at the clinic after I graduate. Full-time trauma counselor, working specifically with veterans. Good salary, excellent benefits, opportunity to develop my own programs." Sarah felt relief and excitement flood through her. "Miguel, that's wonderful. You wanted something like that since you started the program." "There's one complication." The anxiety returned. "What kind of complication?" "The clinic is in Denver. Dr. Harrison is opening a new facility there and wants me to help establish the Veteran Services Program. It would mean relocating." Sarah set down her coffee cup carefully, her mind racing. Denver was 800 miles away, far enough to make a long-distance relationship extremely difficult. "When would you need to move?" "This summer, after graduation." "Sarah, I haven't given him an answer yet because I need to talk with you first. This affects both of us." Sarah stared into her coffee, watching the cream swirl in patterns that reminded her of storm clouds. This was the moment she had been unconsciously preparing for since their relationship began. The moment when Miguel's youth and career ambitions would pull him toward opportunities that didn't include her. "It sounds like an amazing opportunity," she said finally, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "It is. It's exactly the kind of work I hoped to do when I started this program. But, Sarah, I need you to understand something. I'm not going anywhere without you." She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want you to come with me. I know it would mean leaving your job, your house, starting over in a new city. I know I have no right to ask you to uproot your entire life for my career. But I can't imagine building this future without you as part of it." Sarah felt dizzy with the magnitude of what he was suggesting. Leave Roosevelt High School, where she had worked for over a decade. Sell the house she had made her sanctuary. Move across the country for a man she had been dating for a year. "Miguel, that's a huge decision. I have a life here, responsibilities, a career I've spent years building." "I know. And if you decide you can't do it, I'll understand." I'll figure out another path, find work here or somewhere closer. But I had to ask because the thought of being with anyone else or building this life without you is impossible. Sarah stood and walked to the window, needing space to process what he had said. The garden she had tended for years stretched out before her, neat and predictable and entirely hers. Beyond it, the neighborhood she knew intimately, the routines that had given shape to her life for so long. Would you really turn down your dream job to stay here? In a heartbeat. Sarah, you're my dream. The job is just work. She turned to face him, seeing the sincerity in his expression and the slight fear that suggested he was as nervous about this conversation as she was. Can I ask you something? Anything. A year ago, if someone had told you that you'd be asking a 50-year-old woman to move across the country with you, what would you have said? Miguel Smaid. A year ago, if someone had told me I'd be so deeply in love with any woman that I couldn't imagine my future without her, I would have said they were crazy. Age wouldn't have been the surprising part. Sarah felt tears threatening and forced herself to ask the harder question. What if we get to Denver and you realize this was all a mistake? What if you look around at all those young female therapists and wonder what you're doing with an older woman who gave up everything to follow you? Miguel stood and walked to her, cupping her face gently in his hands. Sarah, look at me. I have been with you through family dramas, work stress, my own school pressures, good days, and terrible days. I have seen you without makeup on Monday mornings and dressed up for fancy dinners. I have watched you cry over movies and laugh until your sides hurt. I know exactly who you are, and I love all of it. He paused, his thumbs wiping away the tears that had started to fall. I'm not going to wake up one day and decide I made a mistake. I'm going to wake up grateful that you took a chance on us when everyone told you it was impossible. But what if Sarah stop? What if the plane crashes? What if the economy collapses? What if aliens invade? We can't live our lives preparing for every possible disaster. Sometimes you have to trust that love is worth the risk. Sarah leaned into his touch, closing her eyes and trying to imagine herself in a different city, starting over at 51. The thought terrified her, but beneath the fear was something else, excitement at the possibility of adventure, of building something new with the man she loved. I need time to think about this, she said. Of course. Take all the time you need. The position doesn't start until August, so we have months to figure this out. The conversation stayed with Sarah through the day at school. She found herself looking at her office differently, noticing the accumulated memories of 12 years in the same space. The walls were covered with thank you cards from students, photos from faculty events, certificates, and awards that marked her professional accomplishments. During lunch, she called Maria. Denver, her sister repeated. Oh my God, Sarah, that's huge. I know. I don't know what to think. Do you want to go? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Part of me does. The part that remembers dreaming about adventures and new experiences. But the practical part of me is terrified. What's the worst thing that could happen? That I give up everything I've built here and it doesn't work out. That I end up alone in a strange city with no job, no friends, no support system. And what's the best thing that could happen? That we build an amazing life together in a new place. That I discover I'm braver and more adaptable than I thought. That love really is enough to justify taking big risks. Which possibility feels more likely? Sarah considered the question honestly. Over the past year, Miguel had proven himself to be steady, committed, and mature beyond his years. Their relationship had deepened through challenges rather than being weakened by them. If she trusted him with her heart, why couldn't she trust him with her future? I think I know what I want to do, she said finally. I just need to figure out how to be brave enough to do it. That evening, Sarah sat in her garden with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Miguel had gone home to give her space to think, understanding that this decision was too important to be influenced by his presence. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, careful, cautious, convinced that her chances for great love had passed. That woman would never have considered appending her entire life for a relationship. But that woman had also been lonely, playing it safe in ways that were starting to feel more like slowly dying than truly living. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Elena's name appeared on the screen. Hola, Mama. Sarah, Maria told me about Miguel's job offer. I want to talk to you about this decision. Sarah braced herself for another lecture about age-appropriate choices and the dangers of trusting younger men. Mama, before you say anything, I need you to know that I'm considering going with him. I know, Mija. That's why I'm calling. To talk me out of it. Elena was quiet for a moment. To tell you that maybe I was wrong about him. Sarah nearly dropped her wine glass. What? I've been watching the two of you together at family dinners, at David's birthday party last month. The way he looks at you, the way he talks about your future together. He's not treating you like an older woman he's experimenting with. He's treating you like the woman he loves. Sarah felt tears starting again. Mama, I still think you're taking a big risk. Moving across the country for any man is a leap of faith. But I also see how happy you've been this past year. You're more alive, more yourself than you've been since your divorce. Are you saying you think I should go? I'm saying you're a grown woman who has made good decisions throughout her life. If you love him and he loves you, then maybe age really doesn't matter as much as I thought it did. After they hung up, Sarah sat in the gathering darkness, feeling a sense of clarity settling over her. She thought about the students she counseled, the advice she gave about taking chances and following dreams. How could she encourage teenagers to be brave while choosing safety over possibility in her own life? She thought about the Irish cottage she had dreamed of visiting, the adventures she had postponed because they seemed inappropriate for a woman of her age. Denver wasn't Ireland, but it was a new beginning, a chance to discover what she was capable of beyond the comfortable boundaries of her established life. When Miguel called later that evening, Sarah answered on the first ring. I have an answer for you, she said without preamble. Okay, I'm ready. I'll need to give a school district 3 months' notice. And I want to keep the house at least for the first year in case we need to come back. And you have to promise me that if this doesn't work out, you won't blame yourself for talking me into it. Miguel was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Miguel, are you there? I'm here. Are you saying yes? I'm saying yes. I'm saying that love is worth the risk, and I want to build whatever comes next with you. She could hear the emotion in his voice when he spoke again. Sarah, I love you so much. We're going to have the most incredible life together. I hope so. I'm terrified and excited and probably a little crazy. The best adventures usually are. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of their new apartment in Denver, watching Miguel arrange books on the shelves they had picked out together. The moving truck had left that morning, and boxes were stacked throughout the rooms like promises of a life they were building. She had cried when she left Roosevelt High School, overwhelmed by the farewell party her colleagues had thrown and the genuine affection they had shown. But she had also felt excitement about the job interview she had scheduled at a Denver high school, where her experience and recommendations had already generated interest. Any regrets? Miguel asked, coming to stand beside her in the doorway. Sarah considered the question seriously. She missed her garden, her routine, the familiar faces at school. But she didn't miss the loneliness that had defined so many of her evenings, or the sense that her life was slowly shrinking rather than expanding. None, she said, leaning against his shoulder. This feels like the beginning of something wonderful. 3 months later, Sarah received a text from Jessica Rodriguez, the student who had cried in her office about being too clingy 2 years earlier. The message included a photo of Jessica in a cap and gown, beaming at the camera. Mrs. Martinez, I graduated with honors and got into my first choice college. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes the right person comes along when you're not looking for them. I met someone amazing who appreciates how much I care instead of being scared of it. I hope you're still following your own advice about timing and compatibility. Sarah showed the message to Miguel that evening as they walked through their new neighborhood. Denver had surprised her with its energy and beauty, and she was already developing favorite coffee shops and bookstores. Smart kid, Miguel said, reading over her shoulder. She learned what it took me 50 years to figure out, that loving someone shouldn't require you to diminish yourself. And what else did you figure out at 50? Sarah thought about the past year and a half, the courage it had taken to open her heart again, the strength required to defend their relationship against skeptics, the faith needed to build something new in an unfamiliar place. That age is just one piece of who we are. That love doesn't follow schedules or society's expectations. That sometimes the best adventures come disguised as the scariest risks. Miguel stopped walking and pulled her in his arms right there on the sidewalk. I have something to ask you, he said, his voice suddenly nervous. Sarah felt her heart race, wondering if this was the moment she had been half expecting and half fearing. Sarah Martinez, will you marry me? He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant ring that caught the light from the street lamps. I know we've never really talked about marriage, he continued quickly. I know you might think it's too soon or too complicated. But I love you, and I want to spend my life with you officially and legally and in every way possible. Sarah stared at the ring, her mind racing. Marriage at 51 to a man 17 years younger. A year ago, the idea would have seemed impossible, inappropriate, destined for disaster. Now it simply felt like the next step in a journey she wanted to continue taking with him. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I'll marry you. Miguel's smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Really? You're sure? I'm sure. I love you, Miguel Torres, age difference and all. They kissed on the sidewalk in Denver, two people who had found each other despite societal expectations and personal fears. Around them, the city hummed with life and possibility, indifferent to their ages and focused instead on their obvious happiness. When they broke apart, Sarah looked down at her left hand, where the ring caught the light and made everything official. She thought about all the people who had told her she was too old for new love, too set in her ways for adventure, too unrealistic in her hopes for partnership. They had been wrong about almost everything. What are you thinking? Miguel asked, still holding her close. I'm thinking that the best love stories don't always start when we're young. Sometimes they start when we're wise enough to recognize something extraordinary and brave enough to reach for it. Even if people think we're crazy. Especially then, they walked home together through the Denver streets, planning a small wedding for the following spring and talking about the future they would build together. Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from Maria, her mother, and friends who had heard the news. The responses ranged from enthusiastic support to cautious congratulations. But Sarah found she no longer cared about managing other people's opinions. She had learned that life was too short to wait for permission to be happy, too precious to waste on what other people thought was appropriate for a woman her age. She had learned that love could arrive at any moment, regardless of schedules or expectations, and that the only choice was whether to be brave enough to say yes. At 51, Sarah Martinez was finally living the adventure she had dreamed of, with a partner who saw her as she truly was, not too old, not too young, but exactly right for the love they were building together. The critics could keep their warnings and their limitations. Sarah had found something better than age-appropriate. She had found happiness. And that, she thought as Miguel unlocked the door to their apartment, was worth every risk she had taken to claim it. 6 months later, they married in Sarah's mother's backyard, surrounded by family and friends who had come to accept that love didn't always follow conventional timelines. Elena cried during the ceremony, the whether from emotion or resignation. Sarah couldn't tell. Jessica Rodriguez sent a congratulations card that made Sarah laugh out loud. Mrs. Martinez, you taught me that the right person comes along when you're not looking for them. Turns out they can come along when you're 50 and think you're done looking too. Congratulations on proving that love doesn't have an expiration date. The card went into the memory box that Sarah was building of their new life together. Photos from Denver adventures, ticket stubs from concerts they had attended, love notes Miguel left in her lunch bag for her new job at the high school, where she was quickly becoming known as the counselor who understood that teenagers weren't the only ones who deserved second chances at happiness. So, Miguel said on their wedding night, as they sat on their apartment balcony, looking out over the city lights, "Any regrets now?" Sarah looked at her husband. The words still thrilled her, and thought about the past 2 years. The gossip, the family drama, the moments of doubt, the leap of faith that had brought them here. Only one, she said seriously. Miguel's expression grew concerned. What? I regret waiting so long to remember that I deserve to be loved exactly as I am, at any age, by someone who sees me as wonderful rather than age inappropriate. Miguel raised his glass of champagne. To not waiting any longer for anything we want. To love that doesn't follow other people's rules, Sarah added. They clinked glasses as the Denver night sparkled around them. Two people who had proven that sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that began when conventional wisdom said they should have ended. In choosing each other, they had chosen to believe that the heart didn't age out of deserving happiness, and that the right person was worth any risk. Sarah Martinez Torres, she had kept her name, but, like the sound of their combined story, was finally living the life she had been told was impossible. And it was more wonderful than she had ever dared to imagine.